Sometimes, love isn't as simple as it seems. It's not always about the perfect moments or the happy endings. Sometimes, it's about the struggles, the misunderstandings, and the painful choices we have to make. In today's story, we follow Mark and Sarah, two people whose lives were torn apart by betrayal, only to find their way back to each other. This isn't just another love story. It's a journey of rebuilding, learning to trust again, and discovering that love isn't just about the highs, it's about navigating the lows together. Their relationship was tested in ways they never imagined. With distance, secrets, and the weight of their past pulling them apart, they had to ask themselves one question: can love survive when everything else falls apart? Stay with us, as we dive into the emotional journey of two people finding their way back to each other, through heartbreak, healing, and ultimately, hope. This is Shattered Vows. Let's begin this journey together. Mark Preston, a talented architect in his 30s, was living what seemed to be a perfect life with his wife, Claire. They had a beautiful home, and their life was complete with everything they could ever want. However, over the past few months, Mark started to feel that something was off. There were small signs, too small to ignore, that made him suspect his wife's loyalty. Claire was often late getting home from work, and when she did, she was quick to retreat to her office without offering any explanation. Mark noticed that things had changed. Claire was no longer the loving, affectionate wife he knew. One night, when Mark accidentally checked Claire's phone while she was in the shower, he discovered strange messages from a man. She had never allowed him to look at her phone before. The ambiguous texts and photos, full of innuendos, left him feeling confused. He didn't want to believe it, but his heart couldn't deceive him. Their once warm and happy home was now cold and distant. Mark started to feel like a stranger in his own house. The conversations they once had were now dry and detached, and every time he tried to approach her, Claire would brush him off. He realized their marriage had changed, but the truth was still elusive. Unable to ignore the nagging feeling any longer, Mark decided to hire a private investigator to follow Claire. He didn't want to believe his instincts, but the mounting signs were undeniable. Over the following weeks, the investigator sent back troubling reports. Claire had been meeting with a man in various locations, including restaurants and hotels, but it was the man's identity that shocked Mark. Ryan Miller, a high-profile businessman Mark had worked with in the past, was the one Claire had been seeing. Mark's heart sank. He decided that he needed to confront Claire, even though he knew it wouldn't be easy. One evening, after Claire returned home from another secret meeting, Mark couldn't stay silent any longer. He met her at the door and started the conversation. Claire looked at him with a surprised expression as Mark placed a folder on the table containing photos and video footage of her with Ryan. "What is this?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "We need to talk," Mark said coldly. He opened the folder and laid out the irrefutable evidence: photos and video showing Claire meeting with Ryan, checking into a hotel, and spending the night together. Claire stared at the pictures for a moment, then sighed and started justifying herself. "You haven't been the husband I needed. You were always busy with your work and never made time for me. I have every right to find happiness." Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. Her words hit him like a slap in the face. He had always tried to provide for her, but now he realized that Claire had grown indifferent. She had already justified her actions, but for Mark, the betrayal was too much to bear. "I can't live with someone like you anymore. This marriage is over," he said firmly. Once the truth about Claire's affair with Ryan became public, everything began to unravel. Mark informed her friends, family, and acquaintances about the betrayal. Quickly, Claire's image of perfection was shattered, and those who had once been close to her started to distance themselves. Her social circles began to fall apart, and the support system she had carefully built around her collapsed. Despite her efforts to salvage her reputation, Claire found that the damage was irreversible. No matter how many apologies or attempts she made to fix things, it was too late. She could no longer maintain the charade. People turned their backs on her, and Claire was left alone to face the consequences of her actions. Mark, though heartbroken, realized that his life could no longer remain tethered to a toxic relationship. He made the decision to move forward and rebuild himself, despite the pain. Mark finalized his divorce with Claire. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only one that felt right. With the divorce behind him, he moved into a smaller apartment on the outskirts of the city, a fresh start. Mark found solace in reconnecting with old friends, seeking support from those who truly cared for him. He also focused on his career, working on creative projects that had been on hold for too long. Slowly, he started to feel a sense of freedom and independence that he hadn't experienced in years. One afternoon, as Mark sat by his window, sipping coffee and gazing out at the city skyline, his phone buzzed. A text from an old friend made him smile. Mark realized that his story was far from over. His journey was just beginning. Mark woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside his apartment window. The early morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. He had spent the past few weeks in a whirlwind of emotions, processing the end of his marriage, rebuilding his life, and coming to terms with everything that had happened. But today felt different. There was something new in the air, something hopeful. The first thing he did that morning was head to the kitchen and brew a cup of coffee, just the way he liked it, strong, black, with a touch of cinnamon. He stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline, thinking about how far he had come. There was still a sense of emptiness inside him, but it was starting to fade, replaced by a growing sense of independence and possibility. Mark had spent the past month focusing on his work, an architecture project that he had put on hold for too long. He had rediscovered his passion for design and innovation. For the first time in years, he felt alive again, not defined by his relationship or his past. He was a new version of himself, one who was learning to embrace the unknown and be open to new experiences. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah, a close friend from his university days. They had reconnected a few weeks ago, and she had been a steady source of support during the toughest moments of his divorce. Mark hadn't expected anything beyond friendship from Sarah, but he appreciated her kindness and the way she had always been there for him. The message read, "Hey, Mark. I know things have been tough lately, but I was thinking we should catch up. How about dinner this Friday? Just the two of us. Let me know what you think." Mark smiled as he read the message. He hadn't felt ready to start dating again, but spending time with Sarah was different. She was a longtime friend, someone who understood him without judgment. The thought of reconnecting with someone who didn't carry the baggage of his past was appealing. He quickly typed a reply, "Sounds great. I'd love to catch up. Friday it is." As he sent the message, Mark felt a wave of nervous excitement. It had been a while since he had gone out to dinner with a woman, even if it was just as friends. But he realized that he wasn't rushing into anything. This was simply an opportunity to enjoy good company and rebuild connections. Friday evening arrived, and Mark found himself nervously adjusting his shirt in front of the mirror. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but the simple dinner felt like a significant step forward in his life. He was no longer the man trapped in a loveless marriage, he was a man who was beginning to take control of his own happiness. Sarah had suggested a cozy little Italian restaurant on the outskirts of the city. It was quiet and intimate, perfect for catching up over a meal. When Mark arrived, Sarah was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She smiled warmly when she saw him and waved him over. "Hey, Mark. You look great," Sarah greeted him, standing up to hug him briefly. "Thanks, Sarah. You look amazing too," Mark replied, his nervousness easing just a little. They sat down, and the conversation flowed easily. They talked about their careers, their travels, and even their childhood memories. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt a sense of normalcy. It was as if the weight of his past had lifted, and he could breathe again. As the evening progressed, the conversation turned to more personal topics. Sarah asked, "How have you been, really? I know you've been through a lot lately." Mark hesitated for a moment, then gave a small, bittersweet smile. "I've been through a lot, but I'm starting to find my way. It's not easy, but every day gets a little better." "I'm glad to hear that," Sarah said softly. "You deserve to be happy, Mark. You've been through so much." They shared a moment of quiet understanding, and for the first time, Mark felt like he wasn't alone. He had people in his life who cared for him, people who didn't expect him to be perfect, who didn't judge him for his past. As the night wore on, Mark realized something important. He wasn't just moving forward from his failed marriage. He was learning to live for himself again, to rediscover the joy of being himself, without the weight of expectations or the fear of failure. Over the next few weeks, Mark and Sarah continued to spend time together. What had started as an innocent dinner between friends slowly evolved into something more. They shared moments of vulnerability, laughing about old memories and talking about their hopes for the future. Mark had always admired Sarah's strength and her ability to see the best in people, and her unwavering support had become a cornerstone of his healing process. But as they grew closer, Mark couldn't help but feel a tug of hesitation. Was he ready for something more? Could he truly open himself up to someone again after everything he had been through? His heart was still raw from his divorce, and he wasn't sure if he could handle the idea of another relationship. One evening, as they sat on Sarah's balcony overlooking the city, Sarah turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Mark, I've been meaning to ask you something. I know this might sound a bit forward, but, do you think you'll ever be ready to trust someone again? I'm not talking about rushing into a relationship, but do you think there's a place in your heart for someone new?" Mark looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't just a question, it was a challenge. A challenge to open himself up, to trust again, and to take a chance on love. He took a deep breath. "I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. But I think I'm starting to believe it's possible again." Sarah smiled gently, her eyes filled with understanding. "Whenever you're ready, Mark. I'm here." As the months passed, Mark continued to rebuild his life, step by step. He immersed himself in his work, and his projects began to flourish. He also spent more time with friends and family, creating deeper, more meaningful connections than he had in years. And while the future was still uncertain, Mark felt ready to face whatever came his way. The pain of his past would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He was not the man who had been betrayed, he was a man who had learned to rise from the ashes and create a new life. One evening, as Mark sat at his desk, working late into the night, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "How about we take a weekend trip next month? Just the two of us. I think it's time for a new adventure." Mark smiled, feeling a sense of excitement that had been absent for so long. The future, full of possibilities, was waiting for him. And for the first time in a long while, he was ready to embrace it. It had been a few weeks since Mark had agreed to take a trip with Sarah. He hadn't been sure at first, but as the day approached, he felt a growing sense of excitement. It was just the two of them, no expectations, no pressure, just an opportunity to get away from the noise of daily life and recharge. The destination was a quiet lakeside town in the mountains, a place Mark had visited years ago with friends. It had always been a peaceful retreat, with clear waters and lush forests surrounding it. The thought of escaping to nature was exactly what he needed, a break from the chaos of the city and the haunting memories of his past. On the morning of their departure, Mark met Sarah at the train station. She greeted him with a warm smile, wearing a casual yet comfortable outfit, ready for the adventure ahead. "I hope you're ready for a relaxing weekend," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "I'm definitely ready," Mark replied, smiling back. "This will be good for both of us." The train ride was quiet, with only the soft hum of the engine and the occasional clink of a passing station breaking the silence. Mark gazed out of the window, watching the city fade away as the train entered the countryside. The rolling hills, the golden fields, and the distant mountains filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. They arrived at the small town by late afternoon, and Mark immediately felt the weight of the city life lift from his shoulders. The air was crisp, the scent of pine trees fresh and invigorating. Sarah led the way as they walked to their charming little cabin by the lake. It was small, cozy, and rustic, with large windows that opened up to breathtaking views of the surrounding landscape. Mark felt a wave of relief as they settled in. There was something about the serenity of the place that made everything feel simpler, no distractions, no stress. Just the quiet rhythm of nature. They unpacked, had dinner at a local cafe, and spent the evening talking and laughing. It was the first time in a long while that Mark felt truly at ease. As they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear sky, Sarah turned to him. "I'm really glad we did this. It's good for us to step away sometimes." Mark nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, I needed this. I didn't realize how much I was holding on to until now." They both fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only old friends could share, no words necessary. Mark looked at Sarah, appreciating the way she made him feel understood and accepted. He wasn't sure if it was just the peaceful setting or if something deeper was beginning to stir inside him, but he felt a growing connection to her that went beyond friendship. The next day, they explored the area around the lake, taking a boat out onto the water and hiking through the forest. It felt like they had all the time in the world. The beauty of the natural surroundings was awe-inspiring, but it was Sarah's presence that kept Mark grounded. He found himself looking forward to every shared smile, every casual conversation, and every moment of laughter. That evening, after a long day of hiking and exploring, they returned to the cabin, both tired but happy. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, they sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the reflection of the lake shimmer under the fading light. Sarah broke the silence. "Mark, I've been thinking. I know we've been friends for a long time, but I can't help but feel there's something more here. Something between us." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had felt it too, the subtle shift, the growing connection. But he had been hesitant to acknowledge it, unsure if he was ready to open his heart again. He looked at Sarah, her face soft with sincerity. "I don't know if I'm ready for anything more," Mark admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "But I do know that you've been there for me, and I've never felt more comfortable around anyone. I don't want to ruin what we have, but I can't ignore how I'm feeling either." Sarah smiled gently, her eyes full of understanding. "I'm not asking for anything, Mark. I just wanted to be honest with you. I value our friendship so much, but if there's something more to explore, I'm here. No pressure." Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his own emotions. He had been running from the idea of love for so long, but now, in the quiet of this remote place, he realized he wasn't running anymore. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to open himself up to the possibility of something new. "I don't know where this will go," Mark said slowly, "but I'm willing to see where it takes us. I'm tired of living in fear of the past. I'm ready to take a chance." Sarah reached over and placed her hand on his, her touch warm and comforting. "We'll take it slow, one step at a time. Whatever happens, I'm here." The weekend passed by in a blur of shared moments and quiet conversations. Mark felt like he was experiencing life in a way he hadn't in years. He had let go of the past, at least for a moment, and allowed himself to feel a sense of peace and hope for the future. By the time they left the cabin and boarded the train back to the city, Mark knew something had changed. He wasn't the same person who had boarded the train days earlier. He had let go of the heavy burden of his failed marriage and the fear that had held him back. He was ready to move forward, to embrace the future with open arms. As they sat together on the train, Sarah looked at him and smiled. "I think this trip was exactly what we both needed." Mark smiled back, his heart feeling lighter than it had in months. "I couldn't agree more. Thank you for being here, Sarah. For everything." She squeezed his hand. "Always, Mark. Always." As the days turned into weeks, Mark and Sarah's bond grew stronger. They continued to take things slow, but the connection they shared deepened. Mark found himself looking forward to spending time with her, not just as a friend, but as someone who might one day become something more. He wasn't rushing, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful about the future. He had learned that healing wasn't a linear process. There were still moments of doubt, but with Sarah by his side, he felt like he could face whatever came his way. The future was no longer something to fear, it was something to embrace. One evening, as Mark walked home from work, his phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. It read, "I was thinking, we should plan another trip. Maybe to somewhere new this time. What do you think?" Mark smiled, feeling the excitement of the unknown. He typed his reply, "Sounds perfect. Let's do it." And as he hit send, he realized that life, much like love, was full of unexpected twists and turns. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Mark wasn't afraid to face it. Months had passed since Mark and Sarah's trip to the lakeside town, and life had settled into a comfortable routine. Mark continued to dive deep into his work, taking on new projects that sparked his creativity. Sarah, too, was flourishing in her career, and their friendship, now blossoming into something more, provided a steady anchor in both of their busy lives. The connection they shared was undeniable, yet neither of them had rushed into defining what they were. Their relationship remained simple, built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. But with each passing day, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was growing inside him, a desire for something more permanent. One evening, as they sat together in a cozy cafe, Sarah's eyes sparkled with excitement as she shared her latest adventure at work. She had recently been given a big opportunity to lead a project that would change the direction of her career. It was a dream come true for her, but as she spoke, Mark could sense a hint of hesitation in her voice. "You're doing amazing things, Sarah," Mark said, his voice full of admiration. "I'm so proud of you." Sarah smiled, but it was tinged with something more, a subtle unease. "Thanks, Mark. But I've been thinking a lot lately. About life, about the future." Mark's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "I've been offered a promotion, but it requires me to relocate. To another city." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Another city? When?" "Within the next few months," Sarah replied, her eyes meeting his, searching for a reaction. For a moment, Mark's mind raced. He hadn't expected this. They had only just started to explore the potential of their relationship, and now, the possibility of distance loomed between them. He knew this could be a significant change, but what did it mean for them? Was it time to face the reality of their growing connection or to let go before things went too far? "I don't want to hold you back, Sarah," Mark said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "This is an incredible opportunity for you." Sarah looked at him with a soft, almost wistful expression. "I know. It's just, I don't want to leave things unfinished between us. I feel like we've finally found something good, but I'm not sure where it fits with everything else." Mark took a deep breath, trying to process the overwhelming flood of emotions. The thought of losing Sarah, even if only for a while, was a painful one. But at the same time, he knew she couldn't pass up an opportunity that could shape her future. "I think we both deserve to figure out what we want," Mark said, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. "If that means giving you space to follow this new chapter of your life, I'll support you." Sarah's eyes softened. "But what about us, Mark? What do we do with us?" "I don't know yet," Mark admitted. "But I believe that if something is meant to be, it will work itself out. Maybe we need some time to figure out where this is going, even if that means a little distance." The next few days felt like a blur. Mark and Sarah didn't want to face the possibility of their relationship being tested by physical distance, but they also knew that life had a way of pushing them to grow, to make difficult choices. They spent more time together, having open conversations about their feelings, their goals, and their fears. As Sarah prepared to make her decision about the job, she and Mark agreed that whatever happened, they would remain honest with each other. They wouldn't rush to define their future or make promises they weren't sure they could keep. For now, they just wanted to enjoy the present, the moments they still had together, no matter what the future held. One evening, just before Sarah was set to make her decision, they sat on the rooftop of Mark's apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below. The air was cool, and the sound of distant traffic blended with the gentle hum of conversation. "I've been thinking a lot," Sarah said, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe I don't have to decide right away. I've worked so hard to get to this point, but I don't want to lose what we have." Mark turned to her, his heart heavy with the weight of their situation. "And I don't want to lose you, Sarah. But I also know that sometimes, you have to take risks to move forward." She nodded slowly. "I've been running from that for a long time. But maybe it's time to take a leap, into this job, into whatever comes next for us." Mark took her hand in his. "No matter what happens, I want you to follow your dreams. And I'll support you, whether you're here or there. I just want you to be happy." "I want that too, Mark," Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. "But I want to be happy with you." They both sat in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts, yet comforted by the shared understanding between them. The uncertainty of the future loomed large, but in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the connection they had built, and the willingness to face whatever came their way together or apart. Days passed, and the decision was finally made. Sarah accepted the promotion and prepared to relocate to the new city. The time to part ways had arrived, and while it was bittersweet, Mark knew it was the right thing for her. On the day of her departure, they met at the train station, just as they had done months ago when they took their first trip together. The air was heavy with emotion, but there was no fear in Sarah's eyes, only determination. They embraced one last time before she boarded the train, and as they pulled away, Mark watched as the distance between them grew. He didn't know what the future would hold for him and Sarah. Would they be able to make their connection work despite the miles? Would the distance strengthen their bond or cause it to fade? As the train disappeared into the horizon, Mark felt a strange sense of peace. He had done the right thing by letting Sarah chase her dreams. And no matter what, he knew that life had a way of bringing people back together, if it was meant to be. With that thought in mind, Mark turned and walked back to his apartment, ready to face the next chapter of his own life. His journey wasn't over yet, far from it. And as he moved forward, he knew one thing for sure: he had learned to trust the process, to embrace the unknown, and to have faith in what the future might bring. Months passed since Sarah's relocation. The city had changed in subtle ways, and so had Mark. His days were filled with work, long meetings, and new projects, but there was always a part of him that was missing. He couldn't deny the emptiness that lingered in his heart when he thought of Sarah. Despite the distance, he found himself thinking about her often, wondering what she was up to, how she was adjusting to her new life, and if she ever missed him. They kept in touch regularly, their conversations filled with support and understanding. But Mark knew deep down that the phone calls, the messages, the late-night chats, they were never quite enough. He missed the tangible presence of her laughter, her touch, the way she could brighten any room. The idea of a future with her still lingered in his mind, but uncertainty clouded his thoughts. One crisp autumn morning, as Mark sat in his office reviewing a new blueprint, his phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. He felt his heart race as he saw her name flash on the screen. "Mark, I'm coming back to the city for a few days next week. I'd love to see you. Let me know if you're free." Mark's fingers hovered over the phone as his mind raced. It had been months since they had last seen each other in person. He had been so wrapped up in his work, his routines, that he hadn't realized just how much he had missed her until now. He quickly typed back, "Of course, I'd love to see you. Let me know when you get here." The next few days felt like a countdown. Mark found himself excited in a way he hadn't been in a long time. His thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah, her smile, the way she made him laugh, the way she saw the world. He realized how much he had been holding on to their connection, waiting for this moment, this reunion. When the day finally arrived, Mark found himself standing at the station, a bouquet of flowers in his hand. His heart was pounding with anticipation, but there was also a sense of nervousness. How would things feel when they finally saw each other again? Would everything pick up where they had left off, or had too much time passed for that? He saw her first, a flash of red hair and the familiar smile that had always made his heart skip a beat. She was standing at the end of the platform, her eyes scanning the crowd. When their gazes met, Sarah's face lit up, and Mark couldn't help but smile. She rushed toward him, dropping her bags as she reached him. Without saying a word, they embraced, an embrace that felt like coming home. For a few moments, everything else faded away. It was just the two of them, reunited after the distance and time apart. "You look amazing," Mark said softly, pulling back slightly to look at her. Sarah laughed, a joyful sound that filled Mark's chest with warmth. "So do you. I've missed you, Mark." "I've missed you too," he replied. "So much." They spent the day together, just like old times, walking through the city, talking about everything and nothing. As they strolled along the park, the leaves beginning to turn gold and orange, Sarah stopped and turned to him, a thoughtful look on her face. "Mark," she began, her voice serious, "I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About us." Mark stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. He had sensed it, this feeling in the air, the weight of the unspoken words between them. He had no idea what Sarah was about to say, but he knew it was something important. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady, though his hands clenched nervously at his sides. "I don't know where we go from here," she said, looking down at the ground for a moment. "But I've realized something. I'm not ready to give up on us. I've spent all this time away, and every time I tried to picture my future, you were a part of it. I thought I could just dive into my work and ignore everything else, but that's not what I want anymore. Mark felt his heart swell in his chest. It was like hearing the words he had been waiting for, the words he didn't know he needed to hear until now. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. I don't want to give up on us either, Sarah. I've been thinking about you every single day. I thought about us, about how we could make this work despite the distance. And now that you're here, I just know we can figure this out. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she reached out to hold his hand. I'm scared, Mark. I'm scared that we've waited too long. I don't want to keep living in uncertainty, but I also don't want to lose what we have. Mark squeezed her hand, his heart filled with a mix of emotions. We don't have to figure everything out right now. But I know one thing for sure, I'm willing to try. I'm willing to fight for us. We've already made it this far, and I believe in us. I believe in what we have. For a moment, they stood there, holding hands, feeling the weight of their words sink in. The future was still uncertain, but they knew one thing, they were no longer afraid of facing it together. Over the next few days, they spent every moment they could together, talking about their dreams, their fears, and their plans for the future. It wasn't easy, there were still questions about distance, career paths, and what would come next, but they were no longer shying away from the hard conversations. They knew that their connection was worth fighting for. Mark couldn't deny that the time they spent apart had changed them both. Sarah was more confident, her goals more defined, but there was a quiet vulnerability in her eyes now, a recognition that no matter how far she had gone, some things were too precious to let go. And Mark, too, had changed. He had learned to live for himself, to embrace the unknown, but he also realized how much he needed to build a future with someone who saw him, understood him, and accepted him for who he was. As Sarah prepared to head back to the city where she had made her new life, Mark found himself standing at the airport once again, holding her hand and looking into her eyes. He knew that the next few months would be filled with challenges, long distance, career choices, and the inevitable questions about what the future would hold. But he wasn't afraid anymore. We'll make this work, he said softly, his voice filled with certainty. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with the same hope. We will. And with that, she turned and boarded the plane, but not before sending him one last smile, one that told him everything he needed to know. They had come a long way, and no matter where life took them, they would face it together. The months after Sarah's return to the city were filled with both excitement and challenges. They were no longer just two people drifting in their own separate worlds, they were trying to build something together, despite the distance between them. Phone calls, video chats, and late-night messages became their way of staying connected. But even with all the technology that kept them close, it wasn't the same as having each other physically present. Mark found himself missing Sarah more than he had anticipated. There were days when the quiet of his apartment felt oppressive, the silence echoing in the space where her laughter once filled the air. His work had become his escape, long hours at the office, tackling complex cases that took up all his mental energy. But in the quiet moments, when he was alone, he felt the weight of her absence more than ever. And Sarah, too, was adjusting to her new life in the city. The job she had accepted was everything she had hoped for, a dream come true in many ways. But there were moments, late at night after a long day of work, when she'd find herself reaching for her phone, hoping for a message from Mark. It wasn't easy. She had always been independent, and yet, this was different. Their connection had grown so deep, and now, being apart felt like a constant tug on her heart. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Sarah called Mark. Her voice was tired, but there was a noticeable tension in it. Hey, Sarah said softly. Can we talk? Mark sat up straighter, sensing the seriousness in her tone. Of course. What's going on? I don't know if I can do this anymore, she said, her voice faltering. I'm starting to feel like I'm losing myself in this new life. And I miss you. I miss us. I thought I could handle the distance, but the longer we're apart, the more I'm realizing that it's harder than I thought. Mark's heart sank. The words he had feared hearing were coming out of her mouth. Sarah, I don't want to lose us either. But I don't know how to make this work with the distance. I thought we could figure it out, but I'm struggling too. There was a pause, and Mark could hear Sarah take a deep breath. I'm not saying we should give up, Mark. But I need to know where this is going. I need to know if we're both willing to put in the effort to make this work, because right now, I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything's fine. Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew this was a turning point for them. The foundation they had built over the past few months was being tested. He knew they had to face the truth of their situation. I don't want to lose you, Sarah. I'm just scared. Scared that we're not enough for each other with everything going on in our lives, Mark admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. There was another pause before Sarah spoke again. Maybe we need to stop pretending we have all the answers. Maybe we need to give each other space to figure things out. But not because I don't love you. Not because I don't care. But because sometimes, love needs room to breathe. After their conversation, Mark and Sarah both took some time to reflect on what had been said. They realized that despite their best intentions, the strain of the distance was beginning to take its toll. It wasn't just the physical distance between them, it was the emotional toll of trying to keep up with their own lives while also trying to maintain a relationship. Mark threw himself into his work even more, focusing on his cases and his long-term goals. But the emptiness lingered, and he found himself questioning everything. Was it possible to be in a relationship when they were both constantly chasing their own dreams in different cities? Could they maintain the connection they had built, or was the love they shared something that was fading with the distance? Sarah, too, found herself questioning her own future. She was thriving in her career, but there were moments when she couldn't help but think about what she was sacrificing, what they were sacrificing. She had never imagined that love could be this complicated. She had always believed that if two people loved each other enough, they could make anything work. But now, she wasn't so sure. After weeks of silent tension, the decision was made. They both knew they needed to take a break, to step back and reevaluate their relationship. They were both too consumed by their own lives to give each other the time and attention they deserved. When Mark and Sarah met in person to talk, it was like the air was thick with unspoken words. The love was still there, but it was overshadowed by uncertainty and fear. I think we need some time apart, Sarah said quietly, her voice heavy. Not forever, but we need to figure out who we are without each other for a while. I don't want us to just be together because we're afraid of being apart. Mark nodded slowly, his chest tight. I agree. I don't want to keep holding on to something that's not working. We've been struggling for a while, and maybe we both need space to figure out what we really want. It hurt more than either of them expected. It was as though they were giving up a part of themselves by acknowledging that they couldn't make it work right now. But it felt like the only way forward. In the weeks that followed, Mark and Sarah threw themselves into their individual lives, trying to rediscover who they were outside of their relationship. For Mark, it was a return to his passions, his love for architecture, his friendships, and his desire to push the boundaries of his career. For Sarah, it was embracing the new opportunities in her work and diving deeper into her professional growth. She began traveling more for her job, meeting new people, and taking on bigger challenges. And yet, despite the distance and the time apart, both of them couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There were moments of happiness, moments of growth, but the emptiness they had felt during their time apart never quite disappeared. It was during one of her work trips that Sarah realized something. As she sat in a cafe in another city, reading through an email, she found herself smiling at the thought of Mark. She missed him, yes, but more than that, she realized she had missed the way he made her see the world. She missed the way they understood each other in a way no one else could. It wasn't just about being in love, it was about being partners in every sense of the word. Meanwhile, Mark, too, began to reflect on the time apart. As he worked late into the nights, he found himself thinking about Sarah, about their shared experiences, their laughter, and the warmth they brought into each other's lives. The idea of moving forward without her felt incomplete. It was in these moments of reflection that both Mark and Sarah knew one thing: they weren't ready to give up. They had been apart long enough to realize that what they had was worth fighting for. They didn't have all the answers, but they knew that if they were going to move forward, they had to face their fears, trust each other, and make the hard decisions to make their relationship work. One evening, months after their break had started, Sarah sent Mark a message. "Can we talk?" Mark's heart skipped a beat as he read the message. He had no idea what Sarah was going to say, but a sense of hope stirred inside him. They met at their favorite cafe, the same one they had visited on their first date. The familiarity of the place, the scent of coffee, and the warmth of the atmosphere felt like a comforting embrace. "I've been thinking," Sarah began, looking at him with sincerity in her eyes. "About us, about everything. And I've realized that I don't want to walk away from what we have. I don't want to keep living in the fear of losing each other. I want to fight for this. For us." Mark smiled, the weight he had been carrying for months lifting from his shoulders. "I feel the same way. I think we've both learned so much during this time apart, and I'm ready to figure this out with you. No more running. We'll face everything together." They reached for each other's hands across the table, the unspoken understanding between them clear. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, they both knew one thing for sure: they weren't ready to give up. Together, they would take the next step forward. As the weeks passed, Mark and Sarah's relationship evolved into something deeper. The time apart had given them both the clarity they needed. They were no longer living in the uncertainty that had once overshadowed their connection. Instead, they were learning to trust each other in ways they hadn't before, acknowledging the vulnerabilities they had hidden for so long. Sarah moved back to Mark's city after much deliberation. The decision wasn't easy, but she knew it was the right one for them. She had grown in her career and had found a new sense of purpose, but it was clear that being with Mark was a part of her future. Her heart had never truly left him, and the distance between them had shown her how much she valued what they had. Mark, too, was ready to embrace this new chapter. His life had been filled with goals, dreams, and a focus on work, but now he was opening himself up to the possibility of something deeper and more fulfilling. Sarah was a part of his life now, someone he wanted to build a future with, no matter the challenges ahead. Their days became a blend of shared mornings, quiet moments at home, and exploring the city together. They found joy in the simple things: the shared laughter over a cup of coffee, the warmth of each other's presence during late-night talks, the comfort of knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side. But even with all the growth and progress they had made, they knew there were still challenges ahead. The road wasn't going to be perfect, and they both carried the scars of their past, whether from their time apart or the broken trust that had once threatened to tear them apart. One afternoon, as they sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the city skyline, Sarah turned to Mark with a thoughtful expression. "Mark," she began softly, "I've been thinking about the past, about everything we went through. I know we've come so far, but I need to ask you something." Mark looked at her, sensing the weight of her words. "Of course. Anything." "I know it wasn't easy for you," Sarah said, her voice full of understanding. "And I don't want to pretend like we can just forget the hurt. The lies, the betrayals. I need to know, are we really past all of that? Can we rebuild what we lost and truly move forward?" Mark took a deep breath. He had wondered the same thing many times. The fear of falling back into old patterns, the lingering doubts that they had truly healed. But as he looked into Sarah's eyes, he knew that the work they had done was real. They had faced their fears, confronted their past, and now they were standing together, not as the people they once were, but as something stronger. "I don't know if we'll ever completely forget the past," Mark said, his voice steady. "But what I do know is that we've learned from it. I've learned from it. I'm not the man I was before. And neither are you. What we've built, what we're building, it's worth fighting for. I believe in us. I believe in this." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she reached out to touch his hand. "I believe in us too. I just needed to hear you say that." In that moment, they both knew that while the past could never be erased, it no longer had the power to control them. They had learned, grown, and found a way forward together, with all the complexities that came with it. The love they shared was no longer just about passion, it was about trust, resilience, and the willingness to face the world hand in hand, no matter what. Months passed, and their lives together began to take on a rhythm. Sarah had fully settled into the city, and Mark's work was thriving. They had made their way through the rocky patches, and now, everything felt like it was falling into place. It was during one of their many evening walks through the city that Mark knew, without a doubt, that he was ready to take the next step. They were standing by the river, the soft glow of the streetlights casting a warm light on the path before them. The air was cool, and the sounds of the city were distant, just the two of them in their own world. Mark turned to Sarah, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. "Sarah," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "You've changed my life in ways I didn't think were possible. When I met you, I had no idea how much I needed you. And now, I can't imagine my life without you in it. I know we've been through so much, but I believe that everything we've gone through has brought us to this moment." Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide, sensing that something monumental was coming. "I don't want to waste any more time," Mark continued, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a beautiful ring. "Sarah, will you marry me? Will you be with me, forever, through everything that comes next?" Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes as she looked at the ring, then at Mark. Her heart was racing, but the answer was clear. She had known for so long that he was the one, her partner, her love, the person who had stood by her side through it all. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Mark. I will marry you." Mark slipped the ring onto her finger, and as they stood there, surrounded by the city that had become their home, they knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. They had faced the hardest parts of their journey, and now, they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The wedding was a small, intimate affair. Surrounded by close friends and family, Mark and Sarah exchanged vows, promising to love, cherish, and support each other through the highs and lows of life. The ceremony was simple, yet deeply meaningful, and as they stood together, hands clasped tightly, they knew that they had built something lasting and true. Their life together was just beginning. They faced new challenges, balancing careers, family, and personal growth, but they faced them as partners, united in their love and their commitment to one another. As they walked out of the ceremony hand in hand, Mark turned to Sarah with a smile. "We made it," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We did," Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. "And this is just the start." And so, Mark and Sarah's journey shows us that love isn't always easy. But with trust, patience, and a willingness to grow, it's possible to rebuild something stronger than before. Life will always throw challenges our way, but the question is, how will we face them? Together. Thank you for joining us on this emotional ride of shattered vows. We hope you've been inspired by their story of love, growth, and second chances. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think love can truly overcome everything? How do you handle the struggles in your own relationships? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below, we'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on more stories like this. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, keep believing in love, and remember, you're never alone in this journey.